9, slow, keep going, 10, 11, 1. Beautiful pull. 2, 3, 4. All right, so two athletes performing the same exact exercise. This is a cable row, and there are some similarities, but then there's some important differences in the way that they perform this exercise that we want to be aware of in order to provide, say it with me now if you're already familiar, a training effect, meaning that the exercise does what the exercise is supposed to do when the athlete is doing it to the best of possible ability, and it is delivering that specific benefit, strengthening the particular muscles that are responsible for doing that exercise. To simplify it, when we're doing a cable row, it is strengthening the upper back, the lats, a little bit of that rear delt, and certainly enhancing grip. But in order to do this, it's not going to happen automatically. What we need to do is shape the behavior, because exercise, like everything else, is of course a behavior. Well, not like everything else, like any other instance of a human being doing or saying anything is behavior, and therefore we want to shape this behavior so that the athlete performs this cable row to the best of possible ability, because the exercise itself is just a tool. It's not going to get us where we need to go if the athlete is still having difficulty performing it independently. So both of these athletes are performing this cable row independently. However, there is a difference in their motor control with respect to the eccentric component of that exercise. So there are two main portions or components of performing the cable row or any strength exercise, really. You have your concentric and then you have your eccentric. The concentric, in the case of the band or cable row, is the pulling portion. So the athlete is pulling those handles and pulling that cable towards their body, and then they are extending their arms away from their body. That is the eccentric. And particularly for our autism and neurodivergent population, we often see our athletes struggle with the eccentric component of the exercise. 6, slow, good control, 7, 8, 9, slow, keep going, 10, 11, 12. In the case of a band row or the cable row here, the athlete will allow the cable to kind of pull them forward. There are definitely some more egregious examples of this. These guys here are, for the most part, independent with this exercise. And in the overhead press, we see athletes letting the dumbbells or the soft bells or the sand bells kind of fall down to their shoulders. And in the squat, we see an athlete kind of plop down to the bench or to the box, not really controlling on the way down. Now, what's the problem with this? Are they doing the exercise? Yes, they're doing the exercise, but the motor control and the ability to contract all of those big muscles that are responsible for performing those exercises are the key to performing the exercise in a way that is going to lead to that training effect. So when we're comparing these two athletes doing their respective cable rows, we can see that one athlete has a lot more motor control in the eccentric of that exercise, and the other athlete is going a little bit faster. Now, what's interesting about this is it's not only a physical attribute that we're looking at, but also the cognitive as well, because that kinesthetic awareness or body awareness, that mind-muscle connection, is not only physical, but it is neuromuscular. There's an interaction between the nervous system or the neuromuscular system and the muscles themselves, and that is going to produce the environment or the situation in which the athlete can execute the movement as safely but also as effectively as possible. So where do we go from here? Now, with our athlete who has really good motor control, and by that, if we're going to give it a definition, if they can control that eccentric movement for 2 to 3 seconds, it does not need to be elongated to 4 or 5 seconds in the eccentric. So it doesn't need to be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You get the same, if not more, benefit from having maybe a 2 to 3 second eccentric, and we don't have to get obsessive about counting it unless it really works for that athlete. But 2, 1 is sufficient to produce that training effect, particularly if the athlete can do it independently, meaning they don't need additional physical guidance or support to replicate that tempo over and over and over. So very good stuff there. With the athlete who already has that sufficient motor control, where do we go? Well, we can go to a progression, so we can, if the athlete has demonstrated consistency over 2 or 3 sessions with this same weight, with that same tempo, that same motor control for 3 or more sets per session, we can start to up the weight on that. There are a number of different ways that we can progress. Progression is always the easiest component of programming. So we can add more weight, we can add more repetitions. In this case, we might consider going to a single arm or a unilateral cable row. All totally fine as long as it does not degrade performance for that athlete. And of course, there's going to be a learning curve. For our other athlete, even though this is a physiological issue, we want to approach it from a behavior support and a learning perspective. So it may be, here are the questions that come up for us as a coach. It may be that the athlete does not yet have the physical capability to produce the motor control that is necessary to slow that eccentric component of the exercise, of that cable row down, so that they can control the movement and get the most out of it. In that case, they may need a little more physical guidance, so we might need to step in and provide that hand over knuckles support, maybe even just for a few repetitions on that set for that athlete, so that he begins to come into contact with slowing the movement down and having more motor control when he performs that row. If that is too much of a prompt and we find that the athlete responds just as well or better to a verbal prompt of slow to 1 and then pulls back, this can work as well. We just have to be considerate of fading the prompt over time, because we don't want to have to do that or provide that verbal prompt for every single repetition of every single exercise, because it's difficult to then fade or remove that verbal prompt. So we want to have an awareness of the fact that if we are providing a verbal prompt, we need a plan to fade it back, because the goal is to have this athlete independent as possible with this particular exercise. Another thing that we want to take into account is, and another thing that can support this athlete, is providing behavior-specific feedback when the athlete is performing the exercise. So if the athlete is going a little bit slower on 1 or 2 of those repetitions, we want to highlight that in the moment for that athlete and say, awesome, going slow, super control. We want to put a label to it, because if we can put a label to it, then we can reference that later, and it works really well for that athlete to develop that mind-muscle connection, because first they're developing this awareness of, oh, this is going slow. Because just saying go slower may not work for an athlete for a variety of reasons, because they need a reference point and an understanding of, number one, what slow is, and then a comparative. Slow compared to what? What is fast and what is slow? But by differentiating that for the athlete and saying, oh, great job going slower with that cable row, we are highlighting what they are doing correctly, and we are also enabling them, we're teaching them to differentiate what they are doing right now with that slow eccentric versus what they may have done in the first 1 or 2 or 3 repetitions. So when we are analyzing or evaluating an athlete performing an exercise like this, even when we're doing a comparison between 2 different athletes who are relatively similar, we have to ask ourselves, where do we go next from this? If an athlete is independent and they've met standard performance, then yeah, we can progress it, absolutely. How do we want to progress it? Well, easy enough. Usually with strength training, we want to add more weight or add more repetitions or maybe both. And in the case where the athlete is close to independent with it, but there are still a couple of things that we need to address, mainly their motor control and being consistent from rep to rep, that's where it may not necessarily be a physiological issue so much as an athlete coming into contact with the support that they need so they can make that distinction for themselves. Oh, this is fast versus this is slow and controlled with this row or any other exercise. It takes time. It takes consistency, and it also takes analysis. Is this cue working for this athlete? Do they slow down when we give them that verbal cue, or is it not working for them? Because if the cue is not working for them, you could say it 10, 15, 20 different times. If it's not working, we need to find a better way to intervene with a prompt or a cue so that the athlete continues to develop their skill with that particular exercise. So we're not looking at real compensatory movement patterns here with these two athletes so much as we're looking at enhancing the skills that they've already developed, but looking at it from the perspective of we always want to continue to improve and we always want to set goals. And just being here doesn't mean that we've reached the apex of where we want our athletes to perform. 6, 7, excellent row, great control on the way back. 9, 10. From here, it's more, not necessarily nuanced, but more dialed in productivity regarding the prompts and the cues that we're using. And remember that it's important to give behavior-specific praise, and that also serves as feedback for our athletes so they are able to perform each exercise to the best of their current ability and continue to progress on from there, delivering that training effect, getting them stronger, moving better, and generalizing that to their activities of daily living, which is the whole goal of what we are doing here. I'd love to know your thoughts or how this analysis has maybe influenced how you're looking at your athletes or how you're thinking about the programming for your athletes. Leave that in the comments below. And if you're ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, go to autismfitness.com, learn all about the pro, expert, and master level courses. And once you register, you get immediate access to your pro course, and then you can meet me or one of our master pros for your full day, hands-on, virtual, or in-person practical. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you very much for watching.